Welcome to One Slot, a program designed with the Africa First mantra of News Central in mind. Our mission is to further conversations that seek solutions to the many challenges that confront the continent. We believe that solutions are found by asking the right questions, and today we are asking, how can we elevate the place of Africa and Africans amongst the international community? Scholars say Africa's influence in international organization is at best marginal, and there are arguments that this is largely because the continent is yet to gain the needed foothold in international politics. If this is true, what can be done, and how can Africa, as an influential player in the global community, translate to growth for the continent? My guest today is Mr. Iyah Iyah, an international development consultant and a teacher. He is the executive director of the Center for Development and Livelihood Enhancement, an organization based in Jos, Nigeria. He's also an author and doubles as leader of the Minority Interest Rights Advocates of Nigeria, an NGO. A former governorship candidate in Nigeria's north central state of Benue, Mr. Iyah also previously served as the lead of the African Consortium in East Midlands, United Kingdom. Thank you very much for joining us on One Slot.
Thank you, Felicity, for having me on your show. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. To be clear, let's start this conversation from when we say international community, what do we mean really? And what organizations fall into this criteria?
Well, the word international community is actually a coin. It's a coin put together to serve a purpose of association amongst groups of common interest that work together to achieve a common purpose or goal to their interests. And
okay.
you either be part of them or you seek to be part of them. If you fall within the criteria that has been set by those that are foundation members of that coin.
Okay, so if you were to trace, for instance, the evolution of African representation in the international community from the Cold War era to the post-Cold War era, would you say Africa is finding its place of influence when it comes to, participating in real decision-making in the international community?
Well, it depends on the context where you use or understand the word influence. Most of these international organizations or bodies are products of the Bretton Woods institutions, like the IMF, the World Bank, the Paris Club. And also, if you look at some of those international organizations like the United Nations and its Security Council, those bodies were formed before almost 100% of African nations had their independence. So already they've had their agenda, they've been able to put together lots of the foundational factors, and their reasons and interests were purely protected. So whoever is coming to join will be actually doing a catch-up. And for Africa, you know very well that it's been quite difficult for us to be major players within the international community. It depends in which context you're viewing or trying to explain what the international community here is.
Okay, I want you to pick a context and clarify to us why you believe that Africa is still trying to find her place.
Well, there are foundational factors that we must consider when talking about the role and the position of Africa in the context of international community in quote. At the same time, you should also look at the reason why these people come together to form associations, to form blocks of interest, is first about personal interest, be it nations within the United Nations Security Council, which you know very well that we have 5 permanent members on board, with no African state or nation as part of the 5 permanent members, which does have the veto power. Though we have non-permanent members of 10, which probably Nigeria and South Africa, have a revolving door of tenure out 2 years membership, but without any veto power. So in essence, if we are talking about having a footprint within that particular body, then I think it's a huge pipe dream. And it should be at their beck and call of those that are permanently members of this bloc.
Okay, the essence of us having this conversation is to try to take us from dreaming to reality, so we can actually get our pride of place. So how can we begin to take the steps that is needed? I know there are many areas we can take this conversation from, but let's look at the solution angle of it. How can we begin to make an effort and to inch towards the place of relevance? I mean, some people have suggested, let me see if I can narrow it down. Some people have suggested that having regional blocks is not enough for us to be, have that influence. It has to translate to maybe us having things like good governance, proper infrastructure, have our home base properly catered for before we talk of the international community.
The case of Africa could be seen in two contexts. A house divided amongst itself, or a house partitioned by those that holds the ace. In both ways, we have issues. You talked about pre-colonial and post-colonial era. Africa was partitioned. They were colonized either through the Anglophone, the Francophone, the Portuguese-speaking, colonialist. And so are also the offshoots of these nations in terms of their policies, their international relations, their allegiance, and also their way of life. For us to get it right, we need to return back to the drawing board and redefine a common purpose. And when you say Africa, who's Africa? What Africa? Which Africa? I can give you an example. I've traveled around the world and I've met people, from the Americas, from Southeast Asia, from the European Union. There are lots of people out there that think that Africa is one big country or one big village. You can actually address a man that is coming in from, say, Brussels as a European. He's from Belgium. He's a Frenchman from France. He's an Englishman from England. He's a Scottish man from Aberdeen. But you look at Africa. Africa has been boxed into one cocoon, defined and not really understood. For us to get it right, we need to go back to the basics. We need to redefine our purpose. We need to go back to addressing where we got it wrong or where we were before we went into colonialism. And history will play a very strategic role in trying to redefine our stance, because it's a house.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to be sounding too pessimic, but it's possible.
Okay, because yes, yeah. I was going to take you up on when you talk about us, our colonial history and the impact it's had. We're like a mesh of different groups and different ideologies and all of that. But how can we, in spite of this, you've made some recommendation going back to our history. When you say our history, from what point should we begin to trace or to embrace that, okay, this is the point we got it wrong, and this is where we can begin to address issues that could give us that pride of place in the international space?
There's no civilization, there's no nation, there's no history that hasn't gotten it wrong at a point in time. The British got it wrong. The French got it wrong. The Romans got it wrong. The Ottoman Empire got it wrong. Africa got it wrong. And at a point in time, what we had was a clash of civilization. But those that actually got it right were those that were able to come together and identify a common denominational interest, where and how we can survive, coming together. And there's always a hunting ground. for people to survive or to source for their livelihood. So Africa became a big jungle for them to come and hunt. And while we're not talking to each other countries came and said, look, have the upper Cameroon, I'll take the lower Cameroon, have Guinea, I'll have Nigeria. Let's see how best we could, end quote, civilize them in our own terms. And we need to return back to the basics to understand that we've got it right. We're on the right track. We had our civilization, we had the Nok culture, we had the Quarter of our culture, we have the Egyptian, the pyramids in Egypt, lots of civilizations that took care of our sciences, our needs, our health, our education, our arts, our language, our spoken culture. But then it came to a point in time that we're very busy trying to fend off or to really concentrate on survival, that it made it very difficult for us to come together and have a way of moving forward. So we have always been doing a catch-up as a continent, and then we will, and we are getting it right. But it's painstaking, and I can tell you and assure you too that it's not going to be a piece of cake. It has never been, right from the period of the slave trade. Yeah. And if you are following the news in the US about the cancel culture and the issue of the Black Lives Matters, and those that are actually making it very figurative, and then the solution to Africa lies in Africa.
I agree with you there that the solution for Africa lies with Africa, but. I mean, you also concord that we're making some strides. For instance, we've had the likes of Kofi Annan. We now have Okonjo-Iweala representing, Africans in the World Trade Organization. Some will say these are some strides that we've made to get ourselves some space in the international community that will help us be a part of the policy making. Be a part of policy making that will affect the entire world. But then again, there are people who are saying we're not utilizing these people that are representing us in the international community well to advance the African interest. What do you say to that?
Well, it's a very figurative, I would say. It's like ticking the box. The regime of these institutions were in place before most countries in Africa had their independence. So the essence, the objectives, the vision, and the protocols of these institutions were already in place. We were not part of the negotiation. Our interests were not actually captured in the jigging of these institutions that we have some of our sons, daughters, and Africans heading today. I look at them as mere workers. They could influence so many things, but if you look at the foundational factors there, we were not there when some of those decisions were made about the way these institutions.
Well, that's the point of having a leadership. Having power. Let's go. I'll ask you. I'll stay on that question, but let's go on a very short break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Mr. Iyah Iyah on Africa's place in the international community. Don't go away.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Our guest is still here. Just before we went on that break, we're talking about, you were talking about the fact that Africans were not part of the founding, and the people that made the decisions on how these places can be run. One would suggest that the reason we struggle to get leadership position in these organizations, for instance, let's say the WTO, is in order for us to be able to make suggestion, taking the African perspective that will change or influence policies that will positively impact Africa. So when you say that they're not part of the founding people, countries that made these organizations, I mean, isn't that being defeatist?
No, not at all. Not at all. There's no war that there's no catch-up. Every war, every movement has a catch-up. Someone starts and you follow. We have actually made inputs through the non-aligned movements and also through the G77 to push for some amendments and concession from those that were fundamental formators of these institutions that we have become part of. And at the same time, you will agree with me too that it hasn't been a piece of cake having to come from behind and to move forward. We are moving, but not at the pace that is commensurate to the challenges that we have. Let me give you an example. Over 70 to 80% of the decisions or the policy framework, let's say 100%, if not close to, of the policy directions of the United Nations Security Council affect Africa. But yet Africa, as a continent and African nations within, are not in a position to veto decisions. Even as, non-permanent member states that are quite revolving, with tenure of about 2 years as they run through. Yes, we are doing a catch-up, but while we are trying to catch up, let's look at the example of Asia. It came to a point in time that they closed up, rediscovers where their mojo was, found out exactly what their problems are, and then sought for local solutions to their local problems. The solutions to African problems cannot come from Brussels or from Westminster or from Capitol Hill in America. The solution will come from Africa. If you look at the economic index that are being used to measure our performance, it is based on Wall Street indicators. Nobody is talking about the Kano market or the Ochanja market in the Southeast. Until we begin to believe once more in ourselves, we won't have a headway at the pace we really want to have.
Okay.
So local solutions to local problems, but do not forget. Now, the instrument of coercion using the veto of the United Nations Security Council, which has an exclusive 5-member state, is strictly in the hands of these countries. And we have signed, or we are still signing, into this charter that allows them to pretend issues that borders on war, conflict, global economy, financial institutions to a larger sense, as I rightly mentioned about the Bretton Woods institutions that I've mentioned earlier. So we need to come back. But then do not forget, if I survive off you, how will I give you the independence that will make me lose my grip on you? We have to come back because Africa on its own has enough problems that has actually made us not to focus on the main beef. We are chasing on how
something you said there just stick for me. If I survive off you, how am I going to give you the independence to, win yourself away from me? That's a very strong point you made there. But let's see if we can take this conversation somewhere else, still around that issue.
Yeah.
What's your thinking on the subject that challenges of lack of economic and military power, which forces many African countries to enter into agreements with, say, high and middle level powers, as well as multinational corporations, undermines the continent's capacity to influence affairs at the global arena? You already alluded to that a bit.
Yeah. Going back to what I have said about these Bretton Woods institutions, What are the index that are used to fix interest rates for countries that go to the International Monetary Fund, the Paris Club, or to go to the international market to borrow money? These things are fashioned by the same institutions that are controlled by the same power. And what are we talking about? Let me give you an example of when there were crises in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Nigeria played a major role, both physically and economically. But hardly were they given the opportunity for a post-conflict reconstruction role and the rebuilding of these countries. No Nigeria, I can't, maybe you could quote me right or, I'm wrong. How many Nigerian indigenous companies went to Liberia or Sierra Leone to help rebuild the country? How many of our companies were given the rights or the license or the procurement rights to go there and be part of the exploration, the construction, the reconstruction of Liberia or Sierra Leone?
But must these things be given to us? This part is going to tie with what I'm going to ask you next. But must these things be given to us? Isn't there a way that we can? I mean, some of these countries, they didn't just get these positions; they fought their way to get in this position. Are we fighting our way to change the narrative and become key players in our own affairs?
Now, I'll give you an example. There's a paradigm shift, and there's a concept that is called the new wars. Wars are no longer fought in the trenches between two nations. They are fought by proxy. For you to sell your arms, there should be a market of armed conflict. For you to sell your drugs, there should be a market of a pandemic. Sometimes wars are created for arms to be sold.
Wow.
Now, the Liberian question and the Sierra Leonean question goes beyond just saying that, we did not, move ourselves forward. The government of General Sani Abacha was under sanction for about 7 years. They were seen as a pariah nation. Babangida's regime, then, as a military head of state, was constantly under one sanction and the other. And you knew when the International Monetary Fund talked about austerity measures, that actually talked about rationalizing of our civil service, cutting down on some of our local production, encouraging importation. If the president then, the military president, has said no, there will be a local actor here that will be ready to work with any foreign actor to undermine his legitimacy that was in question at that point in time as a non-elected military leader or a president in the country. This is not what we'll be shouting of. Some of these things, we need our academicians, we need our policymakers, we need our technocrats, we need our intelligent men and women to come together and fashion a way out of this wood.
Yeah, the time space we have for this conversation makes it a bit, difficult to just focus on one area only. So we need to try and touch on a lot of issues as much as we can, so people can have at least an idea of, where we're headed, where we intend to go. Talking about where we intend to go, off what you're saying, I want to take you to the question of the role that aids really play. Africa receives huge amounts in aid for improved social services, some say for life-sustaining infrastructure. Does this have any impact in the continent's standing, in the international community? Because you said something earlier that if I am, I'm making decisions for you and doing things for you, I wouldn't want you to get independence, and I'm gaining off you. That's your word. You're gaining off.
That's true.
Yes. And then I wouldn't want to give you independence. So when we talk about AIDS and Africa, how is this affecting our ability to truly grow somewhat when it comes to real decision making?
Wow. Aid to Africa, as much as It has helped in sustaining the immediate needs of some countries at a period of crisis. It hasn't been sustainable over time. And there's a lot of politics of aid which should be discussed probably in another topic, not today, because it's a very huge Pandora box. I'll tell you one thing. Let me give you an example of the Northeast in Nigeria. I think there are lots of international organizations that are operating within the Northeast. The European Union, so many other groups have been sending in a lot of palliatives or support there. Has really been, have we seen any positive manifestation on the ground? Do we really need aid or trade as it is now? How can you bring a biscuit produced in China as an aid when you could actually buy the kenke produced in Ghana, another or the guru that you could produce in any part of West Africa, where you indirectly be adding to the economic value of those countries? If there's a crisis in Borno State and there's a food crisis there, why can't you come to Benue and buy yams and take to Borno State? These yams are brought in, in quote, the aids are brought in. They are porks. As far as I'm concerned, the fat cats in the international development organizations are actually benefiting from aid. It's a whole topic. And when I sit you down and discuss about issues of aid, we won't finish it in the next 1 week or 2 weeks. The first chapter of it. So to like this, and the issue of aid is a toxic issue, and it's also one of the tools for soft power. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, honestly, but time is of essence. So I'm just going to ask you quickly to wrap your thoughts around this conversation. If you were to give a lecture on this topic of the place of Africa and Africans in the international community, what would be, your parting giveaway to your students? If you can do that in 1 minute, that would be great.
That all men and women are created equal. That a prosperous Africa is a plus to the world. A peaceful Africa is a plus to the world.
I think we'll have to leave it there, Mr. Iyah Iyah. Thank you so much for giving us the gift of your time.
Thank you, Felicity. Thanks for inviting me on your program.
Thank you for honoring us.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as a parting thought, according to IMF's April 2021 projections, some of the fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. Now, this multicultural continent of thousands of languages and unparalleled eco-diversity, with over 1 billion vibrant and innovative people, is on a path that isn't all gloom and doom. Whilst we're not too, proud about the rate of our growth, considering the potentials therein, we, however, identify with the rapid economic evolution of the continent and also recognize the need for genuine collaborative efforts at achieving the ever-growing importance of being a global player for more intrinsic changes and gains. Head or tail, we must evolve to find our spot. I thank you very much for watching. We will appreciate your input on this conversation. Kindly share them with us on our social media platforms at News Central TV using the hashtag #OneSlot. I am Felicity Ezewuike. I'll see you next week.